Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and boy, there's a thing or two going on in the United States House of Representatives. We are there's going to be an effort to impeach President Joe Biden for a number of issues, and we're also trying to keep the government from shutting down, which would be not a good thing. And it frankly, it depresses me. I mean, at some point, we talk about America being the leader of the world. I believe in that. America being the stable economy that attracts so much investment and everything else from the world. I believe in that. Those things are obviously true. I'm wondering how much longer they're going to continue to be true if we continue to show the rest of the world that we can't hold peaceful elections and we can't, our political infighting is so extreme that we're dysfunctional and we can't even budget correctly. So anyway, I'm here to talk about all of that fun stuff. Is Congressman Kelly Armstrong, of course, joined as I am with my Friday co-host Chad Oban. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. Just met with a bunch of people from Minot talking about the military base and making sure our airmen get paid.
That's good things. Good things. And by the way, speaking of that, what do you want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about impeachment, or do you want to talk about government shutdown? Because you're part of it. Well, let's maybe talk about the shutdown part first, because you're part of a I don't know, are we still calling them gangs anymore? But you're part of a group of lawmakers who are trying to work together to hammer out a deal to avoid a shutdown. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be a little careful about it. One of the reasons that we have a small group working together, it's some leaders of Main Street and then some leaders of the Freedom Caucus on the Republican side. But one of the reasons that the conversations have been productive in the last 36 hours is because there's a small group of us that we all trust to keep our mouths shut in trying to figure out how we can negotiate something that we can bring to the floor that can get 218 Republican votes. But we need to get our we have a good NDAA which has passed both chambers, needs to go to conference. We need to get Department of Defense appropes off the floor. We have to, and part of that, and I don't think I think everybody recognizes we're going to need some form of a CR in order to keep government open. So there's a small group of us trying to figure out what that would look like that can get the Republican votes to pass it over to the Senate and start in the negotiation. And I'm more optimistic this morning than I was yesterday morning. And I've learned a long time ago in this town that sometimes that's enough. And we'll keep meeting and we'll keep trying to figure out if we can get there. But I don't know if we do. I just don't.
Kelly, I appreciate your work on this, and I also appreciate the fact that you want to keep those conversations quiet. I've never known you to be a guy who's not really completely transparent with the media, so we'll respect that.
It's just the problem. The problem out here is, and this is the problem, when you're trying to, we flesh out a lot of ideas that might make it, and we flesh out a lot that wash out. And right. When you start sniping, I mean, I don't take any of this personally, but there's 435 members of Congress, and there are a lot that do. And I love you guys to death. I'm not necessarily saying a Freedom Caucus member from Pennsylvania is going to watch this blog, but we kind of made a deal with each other that if we can get a framework of our podcast, it used to be the blog, but if we can get a framework together until we do, let's just keep working with each other and see if we can put something together.
And just to that point, I mean, I'm a very loud advocate for government transparency. I don't consider it not transparent. I don't think that was Chad's point. Sometimes you got to take negotiations. You just got to get in a room together and be candid with one another and get out of the spotlight and try to hammer out a deal. Sometimes that's just the way it works. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Eventually, we'll find out what the deal's going to be. Sorry, Chad.
Yeah, I actually meant it as a compliment to Kelly.
No, I appreciate it, but I mean, one of the problems is nobody has trust in this town because everybody wants to see their name in in a Politico story or a Punchbowl story, and I just don't care about that. I just don't.
So Kelly, sort of pulling out a little bit, you know, we're trying to keep the government open. We're trying to pass a farm bill, and all the press is talking about is impeachment. Are we giving the public even more reason to think we can't govern ourselves with what's sort of going on in Washington right now? Sort of to Rob's earlier point, at some point we have to be able to budget. Some point we have to pass a farm bill. And it just feels like we're going from one party not liking the president to the next party not liking the president. And then we don't trust the elections. Are we like, I just worry about this cycle we're in and what this means for the long term.
Yeah, except you know who's not involved in an impeachment inquiry? The Ag Committee. You know who's not involved in an impeachment inquiry? The Appropriations Committee. I know what they write about. I'm here every day. I understand all of those things. The four corners of the agricultural committees actually get along and want to get a deal together. I don't think this is new. I think there's a couple issues. One, I think people from farm states think there are some conservative members that want to cut simply too much out of all of those types of programs. And I think there's too many U.S. senators on the other side of the aisle that forgot that Republicans took back the House. So but the four corners get along and they deal with that. I mean, even if there wasn't an impeachment inquiry, I don't think there's going to be a lot of top above the headline folds on commodity-based indexing.
I think that's fair.
That's just not true. It never has been true. And that's not entirely terrible. It's really, really important, but it's not going to get the news of the day coverage.
Do you feel, perception is reality. And I mean, I am very worried. I mean, switching, I guess, to the impeachment question, what really worries me, and I say this as somebody obviously who's an outspoken critic of Donald Trump and does not have any sympathy at all, for people. I worry that we're going to be entering an era where the other one side is always trying to indict the other side. One side is always trying to impeach the other side. Like whoever holds the reins of power at the moment is going to try to investigate and impeach the other side. I feel like that's a Rubicon we have crossed into a new era of politics. And Kelly, I got to tell you, it terrifies me. And I don't know. The only way to stop it is for one side to just say, listen, we're just not going to do it. Like we keep escalating. We're just not going to do it anymore. But we've got another impeachment into Joe Biden. But does that worry you at all?
Well, we don't have an impeachment. But there's a big difference there. And I said this to somebody the other day. I stood up on the floor of the House in 2019 and said, I mean, I don't think it was any like sage advice, but I'm like, if you start down this road, one side's never going to unilaterally disarm, Rob. That's not how partisan politics works. There's no altruistic version of that exists in this town. There never has been, by the way. This is a new space, but this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, Jeffersonian democracy and Madisonian democracy were two very, very different things. They didn't have Twitter and they didn't have Facebook, so they did have Poor Richard's Almanac, which was quite possibly the world's first anonymous Twitter account. But the reality is there is a significant amount of evidence of either, we have the White House transition team interfering with an FBI investigation of the president's son. We have a DOJ that did nothing to investigate any of these things for 4.5 years. And the minute we start asking for things, now they appoint a special counsel. The counterbalance to that is making sure we are in the best position in court possible to get the information we're going to request and have requested and have not been provided. I also will say that nobody cares where we start, period. Nobody cared where the Democrats started. Everybody thought that they did when it was, those cycles. It matters where it ends. Donald Trump's highest approval rating in the history of his presidency was 49.4%. It was February 1st of 2020. Democrats impeached Donald Trump in December of 2019. It's not enough to follow. I was a part of all of that. And I think they did it very, very poorly. As an exercise, I think they did it poorly. So we should, as Republicans and the politics of this, we should recognize that and try and learn from those mistakes.
So Kelly, 2 weeks ago, Kevin McCarthy said we're going to have a vote on the floor. Now there's not going to be a vote on the floor in terms of starting the inquiry. One of the rationales for not needing a vote is because Nancy Pelosi did it in 2019. She started the inquiry without a vote on the floor. So aren't you basically just doing the same? I mean, the Republican caucus does not like Nancy Pelosi. They didn't like her as a leader, but then justifying your actions based on what she did in 2019 doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. So what changed? And, the actual question is, what changed over the last 10 days or 2 weeks where McCarthy went from absolutely we're going to have a vote to we don't need to have a vote other than politics?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a part of that, but I mean, I said that, and I mean, by the way, I was critical of that then, but it goes back to this. I mean, it goes back to the same thing. When you do something, you create a precedent that will be used against you or used in the same manner moving forward. And I mean, and that is true. I think I've said this before. I mean, there is somebody read me Speaker McCarthy's quote, and I said, sure. You can call that hypocrisy, or you can say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. But the reality is once you've done it once, it's going to be the new mode of doing things here. And whether that's unfortunate or not, by the way, I think eventually we'll need a vote. And I think Speaker Pelosi recognized that as well. But you can designate this to the committees and put those purposes. The in the weeds portion of this is all congressional investigations need a legislative purpose. An impeachment inquiry is its own legislative purpose. So our guiding light should be for us, if we are being like National Archives emails, DOJ now all of a sudden saying we can't talk to you because we have an active investigation. And by active, I mean for 4.5 years, you put a file on top of that file. And then whenever that file got to the top, you put another file on top of that file. It only became really active sometime in the last 3 months. So if it gives us our best position to get the information that we're entitled to and the American people are entitled to see in court, I'm all for it. I'm not interested in doing this simply to make our base feel better. I think that's a bad idea. But I also think that there is a lot of questions and a lot of information that we can glean some things from through shell corporations and different statements and changing statements and all of those different things. And if this gives us our best position in court to get the documents we want, then I'm all for it.
One of the things that's bothered me, because I think when you look at the Hunter Biden thing, it's not. I think some people, particularly on the left, have tried to characterize it as, well, they're just trying to embarrass Joe Biden by shining a spotlight on the honestly, at times, really terrible behavior of his son. And I agree, if it was just that, it's not fair. But there are real problems here. I mean, there's the fact that Hunter Biden repeatedly used his father to make money. We have Hunter Biden's business partner who testified under oath to Congress that he put his father on speakerphone like dozens of times with people. So those are real things worth exploring. But what bothers me about that?
But Rob, he also doesn't have a monopoly on that. All you have to look at is the previous president and the money that was made.
If you allow me to get to the point, I was going to make that point, Chad. The problem I have is that a lot of the Republicans who are wanting to impeach Joe Biden and investigate Hunter Biden and do all of this stuff are simultaneously castigating the Department of Justice for investigating Donald Trump, or they're trying to we have Republican members of Congress who are trying to fiddle around in the state of Georgia's prosecution of Donald Trump. So that's something that really bothers me when I look at both sides. We have liberals who are very much in favor of going after Donald Trump, who want to put the brakes on investigating, Joe Biden's relationship with Hunter Biden's business practices. But then on the other hand, you have people who want to investigate Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, but they don't want to investigate Donald Trump or Rudy Giuliani or a lot of these other things. That seems like hypocrisy on both sides. And every time I hear one side, make the case, I say, okay, great. Now apply it to the other side. Why can't we have equal standards here?
Well, and I would argue that on both sides, regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat, I'd prefer they were all treated like the clients I used to represent. And that is simply not the case.
Well,
and it's not. But I would be clear. if the president's son is in recovery and not using drugs and doing all of those things, I have no interest in any of that stuff. None. I don't care. I think you both know me well enough to know that is absolutely something I don't think the United States Congress should be spending his time on. Now, if I have $20 million that is moving through companies, shell companies, that I have no idea what they do. And by the way, nobody else seems to be able to answer that question either. And the answer can't just be, oh, it's a legitimate business purpose. Okay, what's the legitimate business purpose? And I have a White House that I will be as sympathetic to as possible, that has significantly changed their version of their interaction with these events 4 different times. And a DOJ that or a White House transition team that directly interfered with an FBI investigation in order to get an interview with Hunter Biden. I think you all know, and there are a lot of things that a presidential transition team does. They don't have any investigative function. It is a purely political enterprise. So these are questions that I think are more than willing to ask. I think I applaud particularly Chairman Comer for doing this in a manner in which we're actually putting together, linear evidence with what we have. And I think that is an appropriate place to be, and particularly considering when you do have people that think people are treated very differently depending on what side of the aisle you're on. I personally think everybody who has power is treated differently than the 90% of the clients that I represented, which I really wish we could change.
Yeah, and Kelly, that's sort of the next question I was going to ask you. We had Senator Kramer on here 2 weeks ago who was going into the sort of talking point of defending Trump because there's 2 systems of justice, one that's bad for Trump and then the one for everybody else. I make the case that we have 2 systems of justice, but it's not because Donald Trump
it's rich poor
is on the bad part, right? I think you just sort of made that point. I mean, if you're 90% of your clients out in North Dakota, maybe driving off of the reservation and, getting pulled over for a DUI or something like that, those folks do get treated differently than Donald Trump. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, but I would also agree that I've had plenty of clients with a strict liability gun charge, and nobody cared. And in federal court, they weren't carried. They're not a lot of the federal court system has no sense of humor and says, well, we understand that you're in recovery now, so we're going to cut you a deferred prosecution.
Yeah. And Kelly, I would say from my perspective, I think Rob's point about the left saying don't investigate their guy, but not ours. I'm not one of those people. I think that we should be investigating these things and looking into them. I worry that when the investigation is done by Congress, it becomes partisan. I understand you would suggest that the DOJ is partisan. I'm not there yet.
Well, I would absolutely. I don't think you should worry about it, Chad. I think that's the reality of it. I said that during the last impeachment. To say that you have 100 impartial jurors in the United States Senate, Congress is really bad at pretending it's something it's not. It's a partisan body. You don't have. That's why the DOJ and the criminal justice system has to be fair and impartial. There's nothing that happens in this town that is fair and impartial, and we should be honest about that, and we should talk about it. But if I am defending a client and my jury pool, and it's political, and my jury pool is 100 U.S. senators, I can strike all 100 of them on both sides of the aisle for cause. So let's not pretend that it is what it isn't. And in that realm, we should remember, and everybody watching this should know this, the U.S. Senate is not going to convict Joe Biden of impeachment. Right. That's not going to happen. And if people think it is, it sure would have to be a piece of evidence that I haven't seen yet. And that is true. That doesn't mean the inquiry doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean the way moving forward, we should go that way and deal with that. But we should also recognize exactly what we are.
Speaking about I don't know if a lot of people know this. When I worked as a private investigator, we did criminal defense work. My father was a retired police officer who did a lot of criminal. We would get appointed in federal cases to represent, for instance, here in North Dakota, a lot of the federal cases happen on the reservation. So we would be appointed to represent a defendant who did not have a lot of means. And we would be up against a case built by, there'd be, maybe 25 FBI agents who touched the case, hundreds and hundreds of man hours put into this case. The federal government would appoint us and give us a $1,500 budget to rebut that investigation.
Yeah, there are some things that in the DOJ stuff, I stay out of a lot of that. One, because until I can read all the briefings and the filings, I want to read.
Yeah.
I want to. If I'm giving you all opinions on a legal case, I want to give you legal opinions,
Right.
not political opinions.
Well, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're going up against the federal government, the deck's kind of stacked against you if you're not rich and powerful yourself.
But that's what the one part I will say on the federal prosecution of Donald Trump that really, really frustrates me is Jack Smith in a filing to the court, because they asked for continuance. We can talk about all of that. But essentially, the Trump defense team said if we read 1 page of discovery a minute, we wouldn't get through all the discovery you provided us in time to go to trial a year after you're asking for the trial date or something along that lines. And the response from the special counsel's office was essentially, well, almost exactly, the defense is based on the faulty premise that they have to read all the discovery to provide an adequate defense. That is not a faulty premise. By the way, this happens in federal court with prosecutors and defense attorneys all the time. But you've been looking at somebody for however period of time. But the reality is my immediate brief and response would have been, okay, you tell me which pages I don't have to look at, and those will be the first ones I read.
Right. So the one thing that bothers me about in all of this is just because I think you're making valid points. That's a valid point. But what really, if we zoom out, it's like, if our goal is to hold our leaders accountable for things that they do that are wrong, whether they're criminally wrong or ethically wrong or what have you, then how can I get really frustrated with because there are people who think that there is no cause to have any inquiry into Donald Trump's role in January 6th, Donald Trump's role in mishandling classified documents, Donald Trump's role with his business records in New York, or Donald Trump's role in tampering with the election results in Georgia. They look at all of that, and we can have an argument about which of those charges are more serious than the other, but they look at all of it and they say, well, there's nothing here. It's all a witch hunt. Certainly that's Trump's argument, that there's nothing there. Trump supporters, that's his argument. Do you believe that there's nothing at all in any of these inquiries into Trump or his associates in any of this?
I think two things can be true at once. And I believe this. I think they have treated him very, very differently than they have treated other people in substantially similar situations. And I will talk. Hillary Clinton's server, James Comey's release of classified documents. There are a lot of.
But isn't our argument?
Hold on a sec, though. I don't equate this the same to like Pence's classified documents or that because of the cooperation and all of that. But the second part of this is what I mean when I say two things can be true at once. Sometimes he makes it easy for them, and that's just. That is just true. But to say that the zeal, I'm watching in real time. Two different administrations being treated wholly differently by the DOJ in real time simultaneously. Those two things are going on. This isn't rich versus poor, powerful versus not powerful. This is a White House transition team interfering with an FBI investigation. The president's son, who by any metric would have an active criminal investigation against him, allowing the statute of limitations to toll on a tax violation that they wouldn't let happen to any other citizen, and at the same time a ramped up and significantly more aggressive prosecution against on the other side of the aisle than we have ever witnessed before. But if those two things are going on simultaneously in real time.
Okay, so you mentioned Hillary Clinton. I think the argument with Hillary Clinton is that they should have been tougher. They shouldn't have given her a pass, right? And if that's the stance, then why should the argument be, I don't want Donald Trump to be treated the same as Hillary Clinton was treated. I think Hillary Clinton got a pass. I want Hillary Clinton to be treated the way they're treating Donald Trump, the other way. And it kind of seems like Republicans want a pass for their guy, or some Republicans want a pass for their guy. I don't want that. I want stringent.
I personally want a complete reset with the politicization of the DOJ. But until that point exists, I'm just telling you, I'm watching those two things go on in real time. And this is somebody who used to spend a lot of time in this space, and nobody is going to convince me that isn't happening because I can see it with my own two eyes.
Kelly, I'm going to.
By the way, it's not just this. There was prior to this, and nobody wants to talk about the Durham investigation and where that went. But this started this started underneath Trump long before it ever got to Donald Trump.
So I'm going to shift us back to government shutdown a little bit. We're speaking of being on hamster wheels, right? I feel like with the impeachment and maybe January 6th and not trusting elections. I feel like we're starting a hamster wheel there where both parties are going to go back and forth. But the government shutdown thing, I mean, I think the last time we were looking at a government shutdown, I think we had you on and you were, or maybe I talked to you at the airport, but you were feeling confident that it would get done, and then it got done. You seemed a little less confident at the beginning of this podcast. Should I, as somebody who cares about, the Minot Air Force folks getting paid and all those, should we be reading into that? Is this getting harder and harder the closer we get to elections to actually keep government open?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not confident we don't end up in some kind of shutdown. I'm still in D.C. Everybody else is gone, and I'm here, and I'm doing, and I don't need a pat on the back or any of that. I just want you all to know that I actually take this really seriously, and I think there's a path forward. And until, I've negotiated really tough deals before. Sometimes I was a good defense attorney, but I was never good enough to change the facts. But yeah, I mean, I think we are kind of stumbling our way into this, and I want to give every opportunity I can to keep us out of it. And I think there's a path here, and I think there's a couple policy issues that I think are winners, both on a political side and a policy side, and I think we should take advantage of that. I mean, we have a governor of New Jersey who is fighting with the Biden administration on immigration. We have a mayor of New York City who is fighting with the Biden administration on immigration. We have a governor of New Mexico who is fighting with the Biden administration on immigration. And the Massachusetts governor just declared a state emergency. I bring all of them up because they are not Republicans. And I think there is a reason that people are frustrated with this. I think you can't be farther away from the southern border than Grand Forks, North Dakota. And if you ask anybody in law enforcement what their top three issues are, they will say fentanyl, fentanyl, and fentanyl. And there is a dereliction of duty as to what we are doing to deal with these issues. And if we're going to pick a fight in a CR, it is my personal belief that the right policy fight and the right political fight to pick is on securing the southern border.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that gets, if there's a unifying theme that runs through all of this, whether it's the government shutdown or the impeachment talks, I think it's unwillingness to sort of get out of our trenches and accept, and what you're talking about is you're pointing out, listen, there are Democrats who are acknowledging that there is a real problem at the southern border, and it's not racist to talk about it. It's not anti-Mexican or anti-immigrant or anything to talk about it and say, this is a problem we have to solve. So I think that's it. Is how do we get people to come out of their trenches? Because we seem to be living in a political environment where, whether we're talking about the North Dakota Republican Party or the national parties, it seems like it's. I mean, we have right now, and I don't know how much you've been paying attention to this, but right now, I mean, there are activists in North Dakota who are touting a legislative scorecard that basically scores bipartisanship to be bad votes, and I feel like that's a manifestation of an attitude where it's like, the goal is to just fight the other side, not try to find something we could work with on the other side. How do we get people to climb out of their trenches? Because I just see that there are people who are convinced if you vote with a Democrat, then you're not a conservative and you're a bad person.
Well, I would have scored terribly on that. I think my metrics when I served in the state Senate, I think I was the third most conservative state senator in the state.
It's a stupid way to score vote.
What?
I mean, you should score.
I co-sponsored more bills with Democrats than any other member of the state Senate.
You should.
I don't know how everybody else does that, Rob. I'm just going to tell you.
Sure.
I spent enough time on criminal justice reform. I fight with Jamie Raskin as much as any other member of Congress. I'm still going to co-sponsor civil asset forfeiture with him. And if somebody's going to score me bad on us, because him and I agree on that issue, wait till you see the coalition that comes together on FISA reform. Not a lot of issues that me and AOC agree on. We agree on FISA reform. And I don't care. I simply don't. If somebody and I agree on policy that I think is policy that is good policy to move some of these things forward, I am going to work with them on that. And I don't care if they're a Democrat or a Republican or a liberal or a conservative. And I'm not going to, I don't know what else to tell you other than that's how I approach it. And I wish more people did.
And you're willing to deal with a primary fight or whatever that might come along with that.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, if it comes, it comes. I expect a primary every 2 years. I expect a tough general every 2 years. I don't think anybody's entitled to this job. And I think if the argument is simply he co-sponsored 27 bills with Democrats, so I'm going to primary him. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what the 27 bills are. Tell me which one you disagree with. Okay, let's have the fight.
Kelly, I'm going to stay on politics for a second. And obviously, you're a supporter of Doug Burgum's presidential campaign. He's struggling to get on the second debate stage. Should he? I mean, you're the former chairman of the GOP. I assume that means you're involved with the RNC at some point in your professional career. Should Burgum be looking at dropping out of this thing and sort of, as a Republican who wants to elect a Republican, should you guys be looking at clearing the field a little bit?
I think getting on the debate stages is kind of, I mean, particularly when you have front runners going to both places, but I would never, the longer his voice is in this conversation, I think the better off the country is. That being said, I mean, each and every candidate gets to decide when their path doesn't look like it exists anymore. Those guys spend a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears doing that stuff, and it's their decision to make. But I think as we continue to go through these processes, the national polling question in general is a little frustrating to me. And I would say this, whether it was Governor Burgum or anybody else, primaries don't, this goes from being an old political operative, primaries don't run on national polls.
Yep.
National polling, and there are people that'll use it. There's some overall predicators that we know exist, but it doesn't particularly matter what you're polling in California when you're walking into New Hampshire, or you're walking into Iowa, or you're walking into Nevada, or you're walking maybe Nevada a little bit because they're close, but South Carolina. So I get the metrics. I understand why they're trying to not have two. I mean, I was in 2016 when you had debate A, debate B, and this very large field and all of those different issues. But also at the same time, I think metrics based on where you're campaigning at any given time are significantly different than national polling.
Kelly, we've used up all our time with you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
I just finished up our interview with Kelly Armstrong, and I'll tell you, Chad, I'm glad I don't have to do negotiations on a continuing resolution or something like that. Because although it's amazing, like how far we've moved the goalposts, because a continuing resolution in and of itself is a failure, right?
Yep.
If we're having to pass a continuing resolution, that means we couldn't pass budgets. We live in
Just
a country
we
can't budget even, but now it's so dysfunctional. It's like, well, it's a good thing if we pass it used to be being forced to pass a continuing resolution as opposed to just doing the normal budget was considered like a bad thing. But now it's like a choice between, if we do a continuing resolution instead of shutting the entire government down, then we've really accomplished something. And that's not me besmirching. I mean, Kelly's working in the environment is what it is. And I applaud him for working.
I worry about that environment though. And we tried to get to it but I worry about, we've talked a lot about this in the past, that, Congress is of one party, so they're going to impeach the president of the other party. Pretty soon it doesn't mean anything. And do we miss out on real problems and I don't know what's going to come out of this inquiry, but if we're constantly in an impeachment inquiry, no matter who the president is, it's a problem.
Yeah. We've
talked about January 6th setting up a precedent of, if one party loses the election, to not believe the outcomes. I would hope Democrats would handle it better, but I'm not so sure that's the case. If Donald Trump were to get elected in 2024,
I worry that we're moving into an era where our measure of an outcome is not like we don't really care what the process is. If it's not an outcome we like, then the process must have been corrupted.
Right.
So it's if the wrong person wins presidency, well, then the election was stolen. If the wrong person is president, then they must be a crook and we have to impeach him. And it doesn't help that Joe Biden has legitimate things that are worth investigating. I mean, there are legitimate lines of inquiry here. I don't know that announcing and putting it in the context of an impeachment is the right way to go. But Republicans have an argument when they say, listen, the DOJ gave Hillary Clinton a pass.
So I struggle a little bit with this, and it's the sort of Republican talking point, like just sort of stating the Department of Justice as partisan, and then filling in it with all these inside baseball, inside, in the weeds sort of things. But I feel like sometimes they just say the Department of Justice is partisan because they're not doing what we want them to do.
What frustrates me, because I do think there's a problem, but my problem is a lot of times they say it because they want the DOJ to go soft on Donald Trump. Like, I'm saying it like I want the DOJ to treat Hillary Clinton like they treat Donald Trump. That's my argument. I want.
And that's sort of where I'm at on the Biden thing, right? I mean, investigate him. Right. I mean, let's investigate them and figure out what's going on here. And I've seen some Democrat congressmen who've come out and said the same thing. I've yet to see any Republican congressmen who are like, yeah, investigate Hunter Biden, but yeah, we should also investigate all these other things. Or I agree with what's happened with Trump or whatever. It is that it's just.
I mean, there's one or two. I mean, but they're mostly on the way out, like Mitt Romney. Right. That's his position. I think his position is, yes, there's real things to investigate with Hunter Biden. Also, let's do Trump too.
Right.
But they're being
Trump's
pushed.
Kids.
Right.
And son-in-law. And I mean,
yeah,
right?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that like Jared Kushner did, for instance, that is very much worth scrutinizing and is very problematic.
And Kushner and Ivanka, right, his daughter, they both worked in the White House.
Right.
I mean, Hunter Biden's never worked in the White House.
Right.
I mean, here's the deal. Hunter Biden is a problem. There's no doubt.
Right.
This is not a new thing. Joe Biden loves his kid, and sometimes loving a kid with that many problems is problematic.
I have no problem with him loving his kid. I have no problem with him supporting his kid. Even the thing they did with the grandkids where he wasn't acknowledging the one grandkid, I thought that was icky. But even there, like, that's a personal thing. That's your family. That's a personal thing. Does it give me a tummy ache? Yes, but I'm even willing to look past that. My problem is him being Vice President Joe Biden, what he was at the time, being on phone calls with these weird business deals that Hunter Biden was doing. Like, allegedly. I mean, Jake Tapper asked that on CNN the other day. Like, doesn't Joe Biden bear some culpability for allowing not just his son, but his brother to make millions of dollars off his political career? That's a fair question to ask. So, but I mean, this is the problem, is our conception of whether or not it's a fair inquiry, not ours, yours and I, but, sort of the public's perception, and certainly of a lot of members of Congress, their perception of what is and is not a fair inquiry hinges on the target of the inquiry and what their partisan affiliation is.
And I think, it's sort of a chicken and egg situation. Is it because the public feels this way that some of our leaders feel this way for their own political sort of stance? Maybe.
I think for Republicans, the base is driving it. I think the base. I don't know if you read The Atlantic this week published some excerpts of a biography of Mitt Romney, and obviously timely with Romney, sort of announcing his exit from politics. But what really jumped out at me was Romney talking about what he sees from behind the scenes, the amount of pressure that Republican members of Congress are under, and not just the sort of political pressure that's perfectly valid in a democracy, like, oh, if I do this, I might lose an election. But the pressure where they feel like in danger. That really was eye-opening. I don't know if you read it or not, but
I have not read it. I mean, I saw some of the stuff after he retired about like the text messages he sent to Mitch McConnell leading up to January 6th and some of that stuff. But yeah, that's a real problem. That's no longer that's terrifying for the future of this country. If people feel unsafe if they vote one way or another, I mean, it's like a movie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, a member of Congress should have the courage to say, I'm going to vote this way. It might be an unpopular vote, but I'm going to vote this way, and then I'm going to explain it to voters, and if they vote for somebody else, then so be it. But I voted my conscience. I voted the way I thought was best in the moment.
But we've talked about some of the sort of far right in the state. I mean, you had a confrontation at the GOP convention with somebody who, I mean, that could have turned ugly very quickly. Over things that you've written. We've talked about, how many people were packing heat in that GOP convention.
I get
emails. Very angry.
Somebody asked me yesterday. I was at a meeting down in Bismarck, and somebody asked me yesterday what my email inbox looks like. And I mean, it kind of took me out of it because I get so inured to it. I mean, my email comes constantly, and I mean, I get aggressive, walking up right to the line of threats emails routinely. A couple of times a week at least. And they're not going to shut me up. I mean, I understand what they're trying to do, and I'm just not going to go for it. But I mean,
Rob, are those people from the right or the left?
From the right. Although I've gotten them from the left, you should see some of the emails I got during the Dakota Access Pipeline protest. Holy Lord.
I suppose.
I've gotten them from both sides. Right in this moment in time, it's mostly from the right because that's where I'm focused on. I think they're as a lifelong conservative, and not quite. I mean, when I was a young kid, I was probably I once voted for Al Gore when I was 20. I did. I didn't know. I didn't know any better. It was the first time I could vote was the 2000 election, in a presidential election, and I hadn't been paying attention really at that point in my life.
That is so great. I feel like we're now into a counseling session of you admitting that you voted for Al Gore.
Well, now everybody's gonna people are gonna see that. See, you were a liberal all along.
You've always been. I went during that campaign. So 1999, George Bush came to Fargo. I think it was during the primary. And I went to see him.
Yeah.
And at one point he said something that I disagreed with, and I didn't boo, but I made a noise. And I've hundreds of heads all turning to me all at the same time. I was respectful, but it's just one of those things that kind of thing.
Well, you don't realize you're doing it. But I mean, there's no room for that sort of thing anymore. I feel like you're not a conservative anymore if you didn't come out of the womb with a Trump flag in your hand.
Well, and that's a good point. I would never go to a Trump rally.
Yeah.
I would never go. I mean, I felt comfortable in 1999 going to a George W. Bush rally. Never thought about safety or whatever. I would never go to a Trump rally. Because
at least not go and be open about what your actual policy. I mean, I remember. I mean, over the years, when big name politicians come to the state, it is not unusual for Republicans and Democrats to go to the rally. A lot of times just to see, when Bernie Sanders came, I know a lot of Republicans who went to see Bernie Sanders events. They just wanted to see Bernie Sanders and hear him speak in person. They would never vote for Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, the event downtown with Bernie Sanders there, I remember seeing pictures where there's Republicans all over the place, and part of it was just, it's cool.
Well, they just wanted to come and see it. Like this national figure is in my hometown. I'm gonna go see him. It's not a thing in the world wrong with that. But we were gonna talk about this rating thing that I'm gonna blow up with a guy named Mike Blessum out of Minot, and he's all mad.
There you go, talking about Mike Blessum again. It sounds like you're obsessed with this guy based on the letter to the editor.
Yeah, well, he's touring the state, going to local district meetings with this legislative scorecard that he purports to show that the House, including, by the way, the House leadership, the current, House Majority Leader, Representative Mike LaFleur, the current Speaker of the House, Dennis Johnson, that they are, a bunch of liberals. You really have to understand what he's doing, because all the vote does is it just compares how frequently each lawmaker votes with the party from the other side. And it's in terms of evaluating the actual underlying policy. Now, I've spoken to a political science professor who says that sort of analysis is useful if you're trying to compare one legislative chamber to another legislative chamber on how partisan or how polarized those chambers may be. And it turns out North Dakota's legislative chamber is actually not very polarized, right? But in terms of trying to measure, is our legislature conservative or is it liberal? It's useless because, or even did they pass good policy or did they pass bad policy? Because it does not take into account at all the merits of the merits of the bills actually being voted on.
Well, I think the Mike LaFleur thing is really interesting. I didn't realize they'd give him a bad score, but as the majority leader, he would often, I assume, prime sponsor bills with Josh Boucher, the minority leader,
right. That's
sort of ceremonial things or things that, everybody agrees on, whatever, that you put the majority leader's names on.
Right.
That's the leaders, I should say.
That's a very usual, or if it's something where, they want to acknowledge, just like I remember when the medicinal marijuana ballot measure passed and it became clear that it was poorly written. It really couldn't be implemented as it was written. They introduced a bill, and when they did it, you had the leadership from both parties on the bill because it was them acknowledging across the aisle, we have to fix this, or right. This measure that the voters passed is not going to work.
Or, just think about, so Representative Mock does a constituency bill that's basically clean up or helping something, clean up policy. And then these Republicans who vote for that thing are dinged because Cory Mock sponsored the bill.
Well,
if it's a Grand Forks specific bill where all the Grand Forks legislators are on it, right? They get dinged for working together,
right? It's absurd. Like if the House Minority Leader Josh Boucher, who is obviously a Democrat, good standing, liberal guy, if he puts a bill out, but it's a good bill. And the bill I keep using is one that increased increased compensation for law enforcement, right? Because I think it's kind of that's a good bill. Almost the entire legislature voted for it. But the Republicans who voted for it get dinged because it's Josh Boucher's bill and all the Democrats voted for it. Why? You're not talking about the bill at all. And maybe if you think the bill is a bad bill, okay, let's talk about that. Yeah. Let's have a debate about whether that bill's a good bill or not. But you're starting with the assumption because Democrats voted with it and Republicans voted with those Democrats that it's a bad vote.
So Rob, I've done some scorecards. I'm actually in the process of signing off on the scorecard for my real job at North Dakota United. You know what is never part of the conversation when doing the scorecard? Republicans or Democrats. We look at the policy first, right. How we feel about something, and then we look at how people voted on it. What's crazy about Mike LaFleur is he didn't score well on this thing. He really scored poorly on our scorecard as well, because all the things that I cared about last session,
right?
I
think those scorecards, right? I think scorecards can be useful if you're scoring on a specific policy area, like if you're pro-life. And you care about bills affecting abortion or affecting new mothers or whatever, and you pick those bills that are important to your specific type of advocacy, and you have bill, and then you score how they voted on those bills, that can be useful, right? I don't think that these very broad ideological scorecards are often very useful. Because first of all, whose definition of conservative are we using right now? I'm not a conservative anymore, according to these people, although I don't know how that happened, but I'm just not.
Because so many of their conservative positions are big government positions at this point.
That's what I struggle with a lot. They talk about wanting to hold people accountable to the NDGOP platform. Well, part of the NDGOP platform is limited government, and I don't know how that squares with we're going to tell parents how to raise their kids. Except when we want absolute freedom for parents.
We talked about that before we got started. The article about the transgender healthcare that's in the news right now.
Right, there's a lot for people who maybe didn't see it. There's a lawsuit filed by some parents of trans children, as well as I think there's a doctor as well who's a plaintiff. And by the way, I'm working on getting them on the podcast so we can have a conversation about this. But it's about a bill that banned I think surgeries and gender treatments And they're filing a lawsuit over that bill. But you're saying Representative Twite, who is the sponsor of that bill, said,
yeah, Bill Twite in this story basically said, he's all about parents' rights, except for in this case, because parents don't know what they're doing. I mean, I'm all for parents' rights as long as parents are raising their children exactly the way I, as a state legislator, think they should.
As long as they're
not a conservative position.
As long as they're only reading the books that I think they should read, and as long as they're only playing the video games that I think that they should play.
That is big government. That's what conservatives used to be afraid of.
Well, and the thing about it is, we were talking about it in the context of Kelly and impeachment and everything, and it's always tit for tat. The problem becomes, how do you articulate, like the next time liberals come along, I don't know, maybe there's some progressive group that comes along and they want to have some really, political curriculum in the schools or something. How do you have a leg to stand on when you are in favor of well, let's apply our ideology to the library shelves and the books? Like, you don't have a leg to stand on anymore. You open the door to this. Either you're for this sort of thing or you're against it. You can't be for it just when it serves your purposes.
What if a group of parents doesn't like books based on Christianity being in public libraries, or ones that show guns or anything having to do with guns? So where does it stop?
Right.
Who gets to make this determination?
And I've always like the debates over the separation of church and state. Now, I believe in the separation of church and state insofar as I don't want, and I'm not a religious person at all, I don't want the state to have an official religion. I don't want to have like one religion elevated among all others. But I also don't think that religion should be out of the schools or out of the public square. I think you invite them all in.
As long as all the religions
are being treated equally, then it's fine. That's our goal, is treat them all equally. But there's this idea that we have to bring them out. To me, American pluralism is we have Hindu people and Jewish people and Christian people and atheists and agnostics and Wiccans and all these different beliefs. Invite them all in. And that's hard sometimes because they butt up against each other or whatever. But to me, that's the way, is you invite everybody in. And this thing that we're doing where it's like, I only want mine in. That's a cross politics. And it's even like, I only want Democrats investigated for crimes, but not Republicans. Like that. Stop it. Stop it.
Yeah. And you're right. And it has more to do. Right now it is conservatives, right? It is, or Republicans, whatever we're calling them, right? That's where it is today. But often it is about who's in power, right? Who's ever in power are the ones who want to sort of push from the government into our lives. You need to think like us. You need to whatever. And here's the deal. At the end of the day, if somebody has a certain lifestyle that I don't understand, who cares? It's none of my business. Who cares? If people are reading a book, or, who cares? If they're raising their child in a certain way, as long as that child is not getting abused, it's their business.
Yeah, I want the government to uphold like certain very broad principles. You can't steal, right? You can't just we have to live with one another, so you can't just play your stereo at full volume at 4 o'clock in the morning and keep your neighbors up all night. Like there's certain, I want certain like basic things, but beyond,
don't be a jerk.
Like don't be a jerk. Don't kill people, right? Like this,
which is a jerk. A jerk kills
that is, yeah. There you go. Don't be a jerk. That's the doctrine. But the thing is if we want to uphold the values of society, right? Like the things that America was founded in, so you can worship like you want, you can speak like you want. You can vote like you want, and the government, we're going to try to have elections so that the government generally reflects the will of the people, or at least has the consent of the governed. In order to uphold that, we have to apply these things equally, and we're at a point in our politics where we don't want to apply them equally. I want you to be held those standards, but not me.
Yeah, and I think going back to that scorecard, it is 2 weeks ago we talked about this, that I talked to a conservative who was frustrated that the only thing that he feels many Republicans stand for is being against Democrats, and that's not where he's at.
But that's what the scorecard's scoring.
Exactly. I mean, it's to a T. If you voted with a Democrat, you're wrong.
Yeah, that's what it is. And because I also want to, one thing that I have talked about, especially with the legislature, is how much of a luxury some of the quote unquote most conservative lawmakers have. They have this luxury where they could kind of, like you're a Jeff Magrum or somebody like that, and you can sit back and just vote against everything. And you get these perfect scores on these scorecards. Look at how conservative I am. Right? But that's the easy button.
That's not governing.
That's not
governing is hard.
Right. So governing is like, well, we have to fund the schools. And in order to fund the schools, I'm going to have to give up some things that I don't like in order for us to pass it. Like, we are constitutionally obligated to fund the schools. Constitution says we got to have schools, we got to fund them. So, we have to do it. And in order to get there, to get a number of votes to do it, and by the way, also because the governor's part of the process, to get the governor to sign off on it, to sign it into law, you have to compromise. And you're not going to get everything you want. And so what they're scoring on is completely alien to the process of governing, because the process of governing is like, well, I got to negotiate with people, sometimes they're Democrats that disagree with you. Sometimes they're other Republicans who disagree with you for reasons of ideology or reasons that they're maybe rooted in geography or what have you. What works in Grand Forks doesn't work in Colm. That's how it works. But you get to the end where you ultimately sign vote for a bill along with the people that you disagreed with, right? That's how it works. Like, what's the saying from the Game of Thrones? You can only make peace with your enemies. That's it.
So in Rob, the scenario that you're laying out there really creates another problem. And so you've got these people who are on the outside, not trying to govern, not at the table, actually trying to pass something, and just voting no on everything. And then they start throwing slings and arrows at the people who are in the room, who are actually doing the governing, and saying they're not conservative enough, or they're not focused on the right things. Then those people who are in the room don't want to run anymore,
right?
Or they lose in the primary. And so and I think that term limits is going to play a role in this. We're going to have more and more people who are on the outside just saying, it's easier just to be out here and not govern, because governing is hard, and just criticize everybody else who's doing the hard work.
Yeah. I don't know what to say to that, because I'm really worried. Part of what's going to happen is the people who are on the outside, they're going to find themselves in the room because there's going to be nobody left. And then a lot of them are going to compromise the very things, because they're going to find, we have to do something.
Yeah, and then they're going to be like, oh, it turns out I didn't know what I was talking about.
Turns out we really do have to pass it. We really do have to fund our schools, and we can't just cut everything, because that's not the way forward. This is really complicated and nuanced, and it's hard, and it's not as simplistic as it was when I was just on the outside throwing rocks at everybody saying, look at how many times I voted no.
And I think part of that is the size of the Republican caucuses as well. You can have a huge chunk of your caucuses who don't actually have to be engaged, because there's so many other people there to pick up the work.
Yeah. I think also, like we talk all the time about the lawmakers that are doing this. I think we have to keep in mind that the reason they're able to do it is because they're being rewarded by voters in some ways. Like, these are people who are winning primaries, who are winning elections. And part of the reason why they're able to win elections is because the Democrats are not offering really any competition. But they're winning in primaries too, against often, more moderate Republicans who have been in the room
and have been well funded.
So, part of this is we have to convince the public that this, and that's why I'm writing. Mike Bless says, why is Rob Port writing about me? Because you are promoting a corrosive, toxic view of how politics should work. And I'm afraid that larger and larger swaths of the electorate are going to buy into it. And so I am trying to rebut that and say, no, this is not the proper way to evaluate the performance of your lawmakers. If you're worried about the way they vote, find the bills that you're concerned about, look at the way they voted on them, and then talk to them about it. And if you don't get the answers you want, then support somebody else.
And what a crazy concept for people to believe that if somebody is of the opposite party, they never have a good idea. Here's the deal. I've never agreed with any elected official 100% of the time.
Right.
No matter if a Democrat, Republican, or my wife. That's not the way the world works.
Right.
And to suggest that the only way you can be pure or whatever they're looking for in their legislators is to vote 100% of the time against Democrats because Democrats have never had a good idea or have never had a constituent who had a good idea that they brought forward is so ridiculous. And I think corrosive is the right word.
Or even that you can't change. I mean, I don't always agree with myself when I roll back the clock like 5 years. I change over time.
You voted for Al Gore.
I did vote for Al Gore. But no, for instance, I mean, one thing that comes to mind, I used to not like early voting. And it wasn't because I wanted to make it hard for people to vote. I had this whole notion in my mind about, you know, I really believe in voting as the franchise. Like it's this, and like exercising it should be this like very purposeful thing. This was my thinking at the time. Now I have since come to believe that, while I still believe all those things about exercising the franchise, I have since come to understand that not everybody, like it's hard. Life's hard. It's hard to get out to vote. If we can do some things to make it easier to vote, that's a good thing. And I think it's silly to stand opposed to it. Now, that's something I disagree with past Rob about that. And I changed my mind. And I think a lot of people are afraid to change their mind when confronted with new information or as they age or their life evolves or what have you. People are afraid even to disagree with their past selves. Like if you're so calcified in your thinking that you feel the same way at 45 about everything as you did at 25, you are not growing as a person. You are not learning as a person. That's not a good thing.
And again, if your only data point is if somebody's of the same party
right
or not. I mean, they're not even talking about, you know, changing their perspectives on policy. It's literally they're allowing the Democrat caucus is deciding what's a good and bad vote for the Republicans.
Senator Richard Marcellet had a bill one session where we're going to start displaying the tribal flags at the Capitol alongside the American flag and the state flag. I thought it was a great thing. Now, I rarely agreed with Senator Richard Marcellet because he was a Democrat and often promoted policies I didn't think were the right ideas. But I thought that was a good bill. I thought that was a great bill, especially coming as it did right after DAPL. You know, let's try to get unified a little bit. So I supported that bill. Anyway, we're beating a dead horse. We should put a pin in it here. Like I said, I am working next week on getting some folks on from the lawsuit about gender care. So we're going to hopefully have that book next week. They've agreed to it. We're just trying to find the time, which day it'll be. Chad will be off again next Friday because he's having a very busy September.
Yeah, work keeps getting in the way of my volunteer gig joining you here on Fridays.
Yeah, well, I was just out talking with your boss yesterday about how much he enjoys listening to the podcast. So
yeah, you know, it's true, and he'll sometimes come in here and say, like, give me notes, which show for a fact he actually is listening to it. Yeah.
Yesterday we were having a good laugh at your insistence about the O-band bump and how silly that was.
Whoa, silly.
Yeah.
I mean,
absurd.
Check the numbers. Again, a lot of people are saying.
There's rumors in Valley City. All right. We're gonna let go. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again.
See you, Rob.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.